Mhm.
Okay. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Hannah. I am the Director of Advocacy at Northwest Animal Rights Network. Um, NARN launched its educational speaker series in 2023, and it went on hiatus in 2024, and now it's back. And we're pretty excited that the first educational speaker series that we have of the year is actually featuring NARN's own Rachel Bjork and Mike Hines. They will do their own introductions later on. But first, let's just get through some housekeeping. Is everything moving for you all? Can you see that? Okay, great. All right, so this is a welcoming space, regardless of sexual orientation, age, religious background, ethnicity, racial background, identities. Um, it's welcoming to people with disabilities, visible or invisible. Native or non-native English speakers are welcome. And then people who identify as activists, as well as people who do not identify as activists. I think that's important to note. And of course, we'd like to do a land acknowledgement. We at NARN acknowledge that here in the Seattle area, as with the rest of the United States, we occupy Indigenous land. In Seattle, we occupy the traditional territories of the Coast Salish peoples, specifically the Duwamish tribe in Seattle. To learn more about the tribes and the Indigenous peoples in the lands that you're located, I invite you to go to native-land.ca, and that's how you can find out the history of the land that you are on. It's important that we take the time to learn and support our local Indigenous peoples and express gratitude for the land stewardship that they have done since time immemorial. In terms of Seattle, you may visit Real Rent Duwamish. That's Real Rent Duwamish, Duwamish, to learn more about the Duwamish people, as well as participate in um, giving. You can choose however much you want to give, but it's rent given to the Duwamish as an acknowledgement and support system. So I invite you to explore both those links as you're able to. All right, so what it's going to look like tonight. Um, I'm going to stop sharing my screen so it's more informal. I will be asking questions of Rachel and Mike, and they will be answering. And hopefully, if we have time, we will get to questions at the end. So please hold your questions at the end or post them in the chat as you think of them. We just won't be getting to them as we're discussing. We'll do all that at the end just to keep the conversation flowing. We are recording. Please mute yourself if you are not speaking. It's important to be respectful of everyone who is present in this room with us. And then if you feel so inclined, you may put your pronouns behind your name in your Zoom screen. All right, and I believe this is the last slide. This is just kind of a highlight of NARN's anti-harassment policy. We take our anti-harassment policy very seriously. It's part of our Justice, Equity, and Belonging initiative that we strive to maintain both internally and externally with NARN. I invite you to read over this anti-harassment policy at our website at narn.org, specifically at narn.org/about/justice-equity-belonging. That's right, that was the last slide. Okay, let me stop sharing. All right. How was that? Rachel! Rachel's here, yay! Like magic. All right. Okay, well, we're gonna start out with introductions. So, and Rachel and Mike, I'm just gonna call on you after I say the question, just to keep things moving, so we're not like who goes next? What's happening? So, um, Mike, why don't you start with an introduction?
Hello, everyone, and thanks for the whole intro, Hannah. I have been on the NARN board for I guess about 5 years, or wait, 4 years. 4 years, yes. No, 5 years since 2020. Getting right around it right now. I'm a longtime vegan, but have not done. I think this is actually, I think literally today is my 21st vegan anniversary. So I remember it was early February in 2004. So I have not been an activist on the animal rights side for as long. I did a lot of social justice activism prior to doing animal rights activism. But I'm like it's always been something that I just was concerned deeply about and cared about, and my veganism came from animal rights concerns and that direction. And when I found, so actually, I think back in like 2010 or something, I randomly met up with Rachel. She was doing the NARN booth at Westlake Center, and I started talking to her, and she needed to run to the bathroom. So I did the NARN booth for like 15 minutes or something randomly, just because I had enough vegan knowledge to be able to do that. But it was that was my intro to it. And then over the years, I did off and on things. But it wasn't until about 5 years ago that I started with the board and started really being heavily active. So I do most of our kind of tech and back end stuff. I do all of our websites and a lot of our systems and tools stuff. And then I'm currently our treasurer, but I have no real background in that, so it's an adventure every time. And I just kind of have loved being in this small, very connected board. It's been an amazing experience the entire time. I feel like we're able to do things that larger orgs and larger boards often have a hard time pursuing. We can be, particularly like with our intersectional justice approach, I think we can be very outspoken on things and do a lot more than a lot of larger orgs sometimes can do that have the very large donors. Challenges we have to do the other side of things of finding ways to raise money. But I love that vibe, and I love the intersectional approach of NARN and always have. And I think we've done a lot of work on that front, which has been really gratifying. So that's my why I love it and why I'm here and what I'm about. So,
Thank you, Mike. And just to
mhm.
let everybody know, I'm looking off the screen because I have two monitors, and so I'm actually looking at you all because I have the questions in front of me right here. So apologies that it looks a little weird on my end, but I'm just having dual monitors right now. So thank you, Mike. Rachel, introductions.
All right. Well, first of all, I'm going to apologize in advance because I have a cough. And so I may have to mute myself if I get a coughing attack. So, sorry. All right. So I'm Rachel Bjork. I actually grew up in Seattle. Um, I'm, I know that you know not too many native Seattleites, but I also, my grandfather grew up here too. So, not as long as some other people, but it's kind of unusual, I suppose. Anywho, so I've been involved in NARN since 2000. Um, I just came across NARN probably at like a street festival or something. I don't know exactly when, but I was looking for ways to um, activism has kind of always been important to me, and NARN just spoke to me the stuff that NARN does, and at that time I was moving towards veganism, and it just all really fit for me, and um, I have just stayed active ever since. I I tend to be rather stubborn, and I don't like to give up on things, so I just stuck around. So yeah, I've been on the board on and off and on the for a while now. I've also been vegan for 25 years now. Good Lord, time flies. But I think, NARN has been meaningful to me, not just because I keep hanging around, but I like that are can we don't have to ask other people necessarily to do things. Like we don't have to ask some um, funder or some other board, like, is it okay if we write a blog post about sexual harassment or Black Lives Matter or any of that kind of stuff? We're like, no, we feel strongly about this and we're going to do it because it's the right thing. And so I appreciate that about NARN, and it really is kind of what keeps me going. It gives me meaning, like I'm doing something that matters. Um, and yeah, I don't know. I mean, I feel like I'm an activism and I'm a vegan because it goes back to just issues of justice and it's the right thing to do. And I feel like looking at injustice as a whole, not just for one, sorry, my cats. It doesn't make any sense to me to only look at one group of people like as suffering injustices. So yeah, I don't know. It yeah, I'm really thankful for our board and we have really good volunteers. I'm really glad that Mike is on the board because Mike is amazing and does such great work. So yeah, I really can't say enough nice things about Mike and I just really appreciate that. And Hannah's been a tremendous asset to us as well. So I'm very happy with our board. Like any organization, like board members come and go because people want to be involved and then life gets in the way and they just can't anymore. So I feel like yeah, Mike, you've been around a while and I'm so glad. And I hope Hannah sticks around too. All right, it's enough rambling.
Mutual on all those fronts.
Thank you. All right. Okay, so let's just do a very high level uh, conversation about NARN's journey to embrace JEB, or justice, equity, and belonging. And I figured you could both take this, but we'll start with Rachel because you've been with NARN for quite some time, and so you've probably seen a lot of versions of our JIP. So
I think we didn't really start thinking about it like as a focus. Probably trying to think of like the first time it actually came up. Um, it had to have been at least 10 years ago. I can't remember exactly, but it was before, a lot of the rest of the world started thinking about it when George Floyd was murdered. It just has, I think for a lot of the board, it's just again part of like why we're activists and why we're vegans is because it's just all part of the same system of oppression. Like we are abused non-human animals because we don't really think about it. They're othered. They're like, oh, it's just what we do, and you don't necessarily consider um like why you shouldn't. I don't know. So to me it's been, I feel like it's been around a while in terms of how we approach things, but it definitely became more of a focus, I think, when there was some animal activists, men in particular, that got called out for sexual harassment, which unfortunately has, not like a lot of activist movement have, unfortunately, men that take advantage of their position of power. So I think at that point it became like, well, if this is happening in our community, this is like really obvious. We really need to say something. And I think that's when it started to be more of a focus instead of just something we're like kind of thought about on the undercurrent, if that makes any sense. But I just think it makes sense. Like it's intrinsic. Like why, of course, like it's, you can't just pick at one little thing. You can't just focus on the non-human animals and forget about everybody else. Like, because if all the humans are going through terrible, human animals are going through terrible shit, they're not going to be able to help the non-human animals. So it just makes sense to me to care about everybody. I don't know. It just seems obvious to me. I know it's not for other people, but yeah. And I think that because we are small, we don't again have to ask permission and to do any of these things. I wouldn't want to. I mean, I wouldn't want to. I don't think I'd want to be part of an organization where they're like, you can't say that, you'll upset somebody.
yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting the timeline. NARN is a white-led organization, and it's interesting to look at compared to other white-led organizations. At what point NARN sort of developed an awareness of these things, and not only an awareness, but actually develop an action plan on
Mhm.
on intersectionality.
Yeah, I don't think we were as purposeful about it, like an action plan until all that stuff with, the Black Lives Matter became more prevalent in that movement. I don't think we were as purposeful. We like things came up and we addressed them, but I don't think we were as purposeful and like laid out a plan until it became more I hate to say obvious because it should be obvious, but more, like you can't ignore it
Mhm.
anymore.
Well, it's one of the,
Thing.
I think that's one of the challenges of, and like, what was the group that we worked with? I just totally blanked the name. I've lost all
Um,
nouns now.
Encompass,
Encompass.
yeah.
Yeah, shortly. I think that was shortly after I joined. We started talking to a group called Encompass that was specifically focused on helping animal rights orgs learn how to be more intersectional and build their kind of awareness on that front and improve their organizations. And so we actually um, like we set aside some funds and we spent a bunch of time working with them and building a plan and trying to understand where we're at in the first place and then where we want to get. And I think, that is the inherently often the problem with white-led organizations is like, yes, it's always been an issue. It's always been a problem. But, you know, if you're a white-led organization, it's easy to forget that because you're not experiencing it on a daily basis. So, a lot of my before I came in, a lot of my other work was mostly about race and social justice. And in general, that is the kind of awareness you come into when you do that work is you're like, oh, this has always been a problem, but I as a white person, I can go and turn around and not see it. As a man, I can turn around and not see sexism. As a cis person, I can turn around and not see um, transphobia or homophobia. So that is one of the main reasons we want to not be a white-led organization. It's one of the reasons we've been working toward trying to build an organization that is not just safe, but is inviting and celebrating diversity and wanting people to come in and bring their points of view and help us convert this organization into something that really is across the spectrum justice oriented. And so I think it's a lot of work and it's very challenging because you don't know what you don't know. And
Mm.
there's a lot of effort that goes into just trying to inform yourself and understand. And I think particularly in animal rights, that's a big difficulty because, we tend to live outside of most of the other social justice work on the average. And it's hard to get into those spaces. It's hard to connect the dots. Historically, it's been seen as in some ways, there have been a lot of conflicts between most other social justice orgs and animal rights orgs, and it's been a historically challenging thing to balance. And so I think learning all of those things and doing all of the work to try to understand and prioritize that work has been definitely been a journey. I think we've done some significant strides on that front, but we, of course, are still where we are as a mostly white-led organization and generally not still having a hard time changing that scenario. So it is difficult.
Yeah. I think um one thing that else I think that inform like another reason just for us to care about this from a purely selfish aspect as an organization is, I've seen activists, and I'm sure you have too, might come and go, not necessarily
Mhm.
because they have other stuff to do in their life, but because they didn't feel protected and they had
Mhm.
something happen to them and then they're gone and we lose that. So if we don't actively care about other people, who's going to be left, like,
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah, we often cite the fact that one of the biggest causes of burnout for activists is other activists. And if you are in a dominantly white-led group, like historically, like animal rights, it's shifting a lot. And in general, that's one of the things too, is to not get hedged in this idea that animal rights is a white thing. Like that, like there are many different approaches to it and many different thoughts and cultural backgrounds that are oriented toward it. So there are a lot of things to learn there and be aware of and not treat it that way offhand. But certainly many of them are, and it's been a hard thing to adapt to that sometimes.
Yeah, I don't know if it's all right to chime in, but I just wanted to say that, we suffer that also in our social justice groups that we work with, where it's a lot of white people sitting around trying to solve
Yeah.
problems that they really, how can you possibly really understand? I
Mhm.
mean, you do your best, of course, but it's difficult. And I think sometimes that's because the people that we're trying to reach in those cases are in the trenches. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
They're so engrossed in the situation and frankly
Yep.
stuck in a lot of what
Yep.
they're feeling, that it's hard to get out and look around and try to become more active in those things. And it's just kind of our job, I guess, to look out for them. So
Just coincidental that I'm talking right after my wife. But when you were saying repeatedly it's a white-led organization, I think maybe this is just me. I take that statement as almost like resigned and exclusive. Why not just say it's currently a white-led organization, but we
Sure.
would
Mhm.
like to get other races involved in leadership roles. That was
Yeah, and
just a
that's why I
thought.
was, yeah, that's why I was trying to
I know
inject
that's what
that.
you meant probably,
Yeah.
but it could
Mhm.
sound bad if someone was just listening in.
That's a good
100%.
observation. I
Mhm.
appreciate that, actually. I think you know, being careful, it goes back to like being careful of the language that we use, and that's, we could, I like the idea of saying currently, because obviously we don't want it to always stay that way. Um, I think one of the things, like, I'll always remember as Lauren Ornalis, that she founded the Food Empowerment Project. I was at a conference one time, and she was talking about the importance of working with other groups. And somebody was like, well, how do we get them involved? Like, how do we get them to care about animal rights? And she said, well, go to their meetings and find out what you can do for them.
Mhm.
Don't just go at them with a request of like what they can do. Like, don't go to slaughterhouse workers, or don't go to farm workers, and insist that they come and help animal rights stuff. Like, you got to go care about what they're doing. You got to, which is, I think, it is still a challenge, because a lot of us are thinking, well, we have to do the animal rights stuff. Like, I don't have time to go do this other stuff. But I think we're slowly coming to more understanding of why that's important, and Food Empowerment Project does a really good job of um,
Mhm.
ex being an example of how that looks in a really, like, they do wonderful programs, and that's so I'm thankful for the example that she's set in the path
Mhm.
that she's helped us with.
I realize we should probably throw things back to Hannah so she can actually move through questions.
Yeah, sorry.
No worries.
No, it's all right. It's the high level.
Okay, so I'm just going over these because we're touching some of these, and I just want to make sure that we get the most out of this conversation. So I'm going to skip around a bit and go to you, Mike. What
Mhm.
pushback did you receive from others, particularly other white people, as you
Mhm.
began your multi-species justice work?
So I actually haven't gotten pushback. And the reason I haven't gotten pushback is the more complicated problem of I haven't brought it into those spaces generally. Historically, I've been very concerned about bringing animal rights activism into those social justice spaces because I know the history and I know some of the complications and challenges there. I don't think I would have gotten pushback on most of the orgs because most of them have done, like a lot of them have, for instance, have vegan things as they're conscious of that and aware of that. And multiple orgs that I worked with did that regularly for our events and things like that. But I have always been very cautious and very challenged around the idea of bringing animal rights into those. So I haven't gotten pushback, and that's a more complicated problem of how do you talk about those things when you're in when you're specifically in a atmosphere in an organization where they have a purpose that is around a specific group. How do you bring that in? And I think that particularly that line between or at least my perceived line, it could be that I'm wrong, but my perceived line between animal rights and human rights has been that when you bring animal rights into it, it tends to feel like a negative thing. And the reason that there's this really complicated problem of for as animal rights activists, we think of animals in a much more pure way. We think of them as other sentient beings that we need to take care of like all sentient beings, right? Like, and we as NARN at NARN, we're very specific about all sentient beings, including humans, for instance. Like we don't put that separation in place and we don't think of it as pulling something down as an issue. Like a lot of times when you're in a social justice org that's about human rights, if you bring up animals as a parallel, it gets treated like it's pulling it down. Whereas we don't think that way. We think we're trying to put it into the same tier because we think they're just as valuable. But that's very, very hard for a lot of people. And often they see it as you trying to either interject or pull down the group that you're there to support. And so that's been a very big challenge for me. It's also made me very uncomfortable at different times. But the reality is I've generally shirked away from it instead of doing something about it and pushing on it. So I want to learn how to do that in a way that's meaningful. I also think that's another reason that the more our board is built of people of all of the different communities, the more they can be advocates within their own communities and not feel like we're, injecting that into it. But I also try to be in those spaces and try to do what I can to bring it in. Um, now that we're talking about it and thinking about it, if that makes sense.
I,
Rachel, do you want to add something?
yeah, I think I totally agree with what Mike said. I think that NARN and probably other animal groups have gotten some pushback because we're like for some of us anyway, we're very focused on the non-human animals, right? So we're focused on the whales or the dogs or whatever. And so sometimes like when people get upset about dog fighting or cockfighting or hunting whales, like those activities tend also to be carried out by certain groups of people. Like we'll have, well, at least the focus anyway. I mean, you have like Iceland that goes hunting whales, but oftentimes the focus is on the Japanese or the Macaw tribe, right? We don't talk about there's like the Iceland, tons of whales that get killed by that, or Norway, or the white ones. And then the dog fighting has oftentimes been a part of the culture of certain Black communities. Cockfighting has been part of the culture for some Hispanic communities. Not all, but like it tends to get correlated with that. And so sometimes when you talk about those things and people get really mad about it, like Michael Vick, and that can be seen as racist when you're focused on that and you don't necessarily think about, well, all the pigs and all the rest of the animals that are killed by, the global majority, the white folks. So it can, I don't think people intend it that way, but some animal rights activists just tend to like, oh my God, we have to save the animals, and anybody that's doing this stuff is terrible. And it's hard for some people to kind of think back on like, well, why do they do that? I mean, like cockfighting is now heavily involved with like money laundering and things like that. Sure, there's a traditional aspect to it, but that's not where the large problems go. I'm sure that Jenny could talk at length about how that happens. But for me, I feel like instead of getting tied down in that, like we should be talking about things like the factory farming, or I can talk about the Primate Research Center and things like that. Like I don't have to touch on those other things. We can have people that are in those own communities talk about those issues and not have like white people go wag our fingers at what other groups do. Like it always kind of bothered me that people were really upset about people eating dogs, but they're not upset about people eating pigs.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a matter of like your cultural upbringing. There's plenty of communities around the world that don't treat dogs in the same way, but that's just how we're raised.
Mm-hmm.
And in this country, it's changed over the generations. I'm sure that my great grandparents probably just left the dog outside and didn't care if they had a dog. It's like it's changed in the way we're brought up, and I don't think sometimes people give each other grace about like, well, why do you do this? I don't really think most people are. I don't want to think most people are evil. I'm having a kind of hard time right now with Trump, but I try to think about like, well, why do people do this? Like what happened to them in their lives? That kind of, I try to think of like the whys behind things. and not demonize anybody. But a lot of us are raised to do that to somebody. Well, that person's bad and I'm good. And
Mhm.
I don't think that helps solve the problem.
I want to go back, just pick up a note there for not what Fernando put in the chat. He mentioned the idea of a label of collective liberationist instead of animal rights activists. And I like that. Like, I definitely think that's the ideal approach. We have this challenge of it's in our name, Northwest Animal Rights Network. So like often it feels like when we've actually had that conversation a lot, we go to talk about things on the intersectional justice point of view, and you know, it's kind of our identity as an animal rights org. And even talking to like people about, more incentivizing about veganism or things that are more about just trying to shift cultural stuff, often that can be a challenge. So it is, I think the terminology is very challenging. And I think I do like that term a lot more. It's a matter of trying to figure out how we do that as an org.
I think like you and Hannah have had you and Hannah have good luck talking to some different environmental groups, and
Hmm.
just being in those spaces and having conversations, because I know that there were some occasions with other environmental groups where they're like, oh my God, you animal rights people only care about the animals. And only until like we had more conversations with those groups, then they're like, oh, I see, it's
Hmm.
not just about the animals for you. And they kind of got their hackles down. But
Yeah.
it's just building, it's a lot of times building relationships. Um,
Hmm.
but yes, Fernando has a good point. It's that connotation, like a lot of people say plant-based instead of vegan because they're like, oh, vegan, bad.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of history tied to the term. That point though about so we were working with a community group that's specifically trying to protect their community from concentrated animal feeding operations, CAFOs. And they've been doing it for decades, and they're doing it as protection of their own community and their own people, um, in Yakima Valley. Yeah, Yakima Valley, right? No, what? I always mess up the location. Um, South Central Washington.
Yeah, Yakima.
And yes, Yakima. I said it, and then I was like, "Is that right?" Yes, it's right. Um, and not only did they end up lowering their hackles after a bunch of conversations and them understanding that we care about them, and we care about the kind of universal impact of the environmental side on humans and non-humans alike, that the woman running that group actually ended up including things about the animals, which she had never done. So we actually ended up with a bridge between groups that reinforce both sides, and turned into a really great example of that. But it's few and far between when that happens, but it is, if you put the work into building the relationships, I think it makes a big difference. And I think that's across the board with intersectional work. Like you can't just do it transactionally. You have to build the relationships and actually be involved in the different community groups.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, definitely.
So, speaking of correct terminology and the importance of terminology, that brings me to another question that I have for both of you. And it involves some background, so bear with me, everyone. Many progressive organizations claim to be intersectional. Intersectionality, as a term, was termed by Kimberly Crenshaw, who states that intersectionality is how individual characteristics such as race, sex, gender, and class intersect with one another. Intersectionality has been a useful conceptual tool for NARN to make connections between non-human animals and human struggles. However, AFCO writes in Racism as Zoological Witchcraft, which I highly recommend, that we should be moving beyond intersectionality, as it upholds categorical thinking that maintains colonized systems. She states in terms of how liberation movements analyze instances of oppression, quote, as soon as we see which body is being violated, we file their experience of injustice in a specific conceptual filing cabinet, which forces us to think about their liberation through a specific limiting filter, unquote, such as animal rights or feminism. That's what she means by category or filter.
Mhm.
How does NARN avoid filing these violations or injustices as an X issue or a Y issue? Or put another way, How do we approach dismantling complex webs of injustice in creative ways that avoids framing struggles through their respective isms, i.e., merely using speciesism principles to solve animal injustice, merely using feminism to liberate women, and etc. Rachel, do you want to take it first and then Mike?
I do. I think being, I don't want to say creative, that doesn't say enough of what I want, but thinking about the words that we use helps. Hannah, I appreciate that you've hammered on the bodily autonomy issue because that is applicable to any body.
Mhm.
And I know, that's something that's talked about a lot in feminist groups and women groups. But it's applicable to men and women and trans and non-human animals. Like everyone deserves to decide what happens to them, and to have control over their bodies. And so it's not limited to anybody. So I think just putting a little more thought into the words we use helps. Um, but I think that goes, I do very strongly feel that this is the way that we treat animals and the way that we treat human animals and non-human animals is all connected. And it makes perfect sense to me. Like we're never going to solve the problem if we just pick away at pieces of it. We're not going to have liberation for the non-human animals if human animals are still struggling and they're have these horrible jobs in factory farms, or they're get taken advantage of by their employer, not paid correctly, or they're deported, or any number of the things that happen to the human animals. Like if we have this mindset of it's okay to treat other sentient beings in a really shitty way, you're not ever going to get collective liberation. And so it makes sense to me to treat it all under one bucket. Like why we oppress people, why do we do these things, and like kind of figure that out. And I mean, capitalism is a huge part of it because it's transactional. Like I'm doing this
Mhm.
so you can do this for me, and I'm only doing this so you can give me money. We should do things because it's the right thing to do. Like,
Mhm.
how is that so hard? I mean, apparently it is, but I don't know. I think it requires like a serious adjustment of our thinking and our priorities. Like, I'm
Mhm.
sure we all are aware of like, well, we have to keep drilling so we have energy instead of, I don't know, maybe we just use less energy instead of figuring out new ways to have more power and stuff like that. I don't know.
Use less. What?
I know. I know. It is not ever going to be effective unless if we keep compartmentalizing everything. We're never going to get there ever if we keep doing that. So part of it is the words that we use. And so I appreciate that Hannah's been very you did great with that. So thank you.
Yeah, I think it's a super challenging and interesting discussion point and thing to look at and thing to spend time on. I think on one side, I totally get it. I agree, I certainly see the fight for justice as universal, and I see it as, we're all part of the same web of systems and dealing with the impacts of the same bad actors and systems. Um, but at the same time, even the framing of the question is interesting because the framing of the question is, we do this, we categorize this group and do this. And I think that comes from this kind of top-down mentality about it. Whereas I think the challenge has always been with this. This is consistently a problem in every social justice group I've been in. Like, like the use of the term BIPOC, for instance, has, like for many years used that term, and then it started to feel like lumping a bunch of people into the same group and treating their problems as the same issues. Whereas, Black people are dealing with very different specific problems, many in day-to-day life than maybe Indigenous people are dealing with, even though they're related and they're similar, they're different life experiences. And I think when you think about any given individual and when you're thinking about how they are surviving and how they're dealing with the world, their particular experiences are very important. Like they're the fun foundation of why we're fighting for the justice. And so I think if you're thinking about it as this like architectural problem where you're like, we're going to solve this, so we don't want to compartmentalize these things, that feels like it makes sense. But if you go from the other direction and look at it as from the bottom up of these are real life experiences, like those, each of those different life experiences is unique and has its own particular problems. And I think that's what motivates people. That's why you care about it. That's why you do the things that you do. And so losing those individual things on any particular group's issues can be very challenging because that's where the root of the issues are for them. But so I think it's like a balancing act. Like I think you can't get rid of that. You don't want to like lose the uniqueness and the human experience and the qualities of that side of life. But we need to figure out a way to work together so that we bring those things, we identify all the common roots and go after them. But while still using people's real life experience. I think that's often a common problem with white activism is we tend to be like, we're going to go fix this problem. And often it's very conceptual and very intellectual and doesn't really necessarily understand the lived experience that is the reason we're fixing it and trying to work on the things.
That's an excellent point, Mike. Thank you. All the
Yeah.
more reason to incorporate other viewpoints.
Oh,
Yes.
Yeah, that just makes me think of, when white animal rights activists, compare oppressions to one another. Like they compare the enslavement of Black people to factory farming or something like that. And
Mhm.
what, and obviously there's lots of dangers to that. But I think
Mhm.
that compression of lived experience and not understanding the multi dimensions of each struggle is something that white activists could really work on doing.
Mhm.
And that's kind of what you I started thinking about that as you were talking is those comparisons that animal rights advocates who are white often and still often still make.
Yeah, still
And it
common.
simplifies the issue. It compresses it in a way that just completely erases the true struggle underneath these oppressions.
Mhm.
Um, okay, where are we? We're coming up on 10 minutes, so I'm gonna bring in another book. In Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer, she talks about how despair is one of the biggest inhibitors of action, that people cannot rise up to dismantle systems of
Mhm.
oppression. She was talking about environmental oppression in her book, but this applies to all systems. Um, cannot dismantle systems of oppression while in a frozen state of despair. In today's climate in particular, how does NARN avoid despair in our liberation work? And how reliant are we on our networks to avoid such a despaired, immobile state? Mike, I'll let you take this one first.
So I mean, I think on the, you know, at the fundamental side of it, I think that is what I feel like is one of the strengths of NARN and one of the things that I want, like that we continually try to do is to build connections and to build on community and to find ways um, to engage at that level. I think the real counterpoint to despair is like I think despair is often a very solitary experience. I think it comes when you feel like you are alone or you're just seeing the impending doom and you're generally seeing that there's nothing you can do about it as an individual. And I think the experience when you're in community is very, very different. It can even be empowering and like give you purpose and be uplifting. And like I went to the rally and the march, MLK rally and march, and like it was powerful. There were amazing, despite the fact that what was happening on the same day, you know, was like the inauguration was happening the same day, and you're just like okay, well, I'm just not going to pay any attention to that, and I'm going to go be in community and spend time with people, hearing about what we can do and how we can move things forward and how we can fight that. And it was, like it's a world of difference. Like if you're sitting even doing, social media activism or something else, like quote unquote. But if you're even if you're doing that, like and feel like you have a purpose, the difference between that and being in community and connecting with, hundreds of other people that all are super motivated about those issues is massive. Like it no longer feels, it no longer feels like despair. It feels like challenge. It feels like, you know, difficulty and it feels arduous at times, but it doesn't feel like despair. It feels like connecting with other humans. And in our case, other non-humans. Um, so I mean, I think that that's for me, that's at the root of it is just identifying and being in community and finding ways to combat that oppression.
I totally agree with what you said, Mike. I feel like um, despair and feeling like you can't do anything is like a huge obstacle to change in any way. I mean, how many of us have encountered people that are like, oh, well, I love animals, but it just doesn't matter like on the grand scale of things, like whether I eat them or not. I mean, I know people that they do like they feel that they care about animals. They feel that, but they're like, it doesn't matter because in the grand scheme of things, we're all doomed. And they don't, or they care about what's going on in the world today, but they just feel like their actions don't matter. And I feel like that attitude frustrates me to no end. Like I get mad. My my reaction to despair is I just get fired up like, I have to do something. Like that's my antidote is I have to do something about it. I can't just sit there. Otherwise I'll like fume and I get madder. So it's like, I don't know, it's very difficult to combat. And I do think the community is important to say like, yes, we're in this together and here's something you can do like that's manageable for you and to help people see that you can do this thing. You can call your congressperson. You can choose to maybe stop eating cow products. Like here's something manageable for you to do, and to, like gives people some sort of sense of empowerment that like, oh my God, I can do something. But it is a huge. The whole despair thing is huge.
Mhm.
Very big obstacle to get people to like prod them along to like do anything because they just feel like it doesn't matter. And we do, like we matter, like the stuff we do matters, but it can
Mhm.
be hard to convince other people of that. So I feel like creating a sense of community and caring is like hugely important. And that's another reason why like NARN has been important to me, because we are a network and it's like that's important, is to reach out and have that.
Mhm.
Otherwise, people will fall into that pit and feel like it doesn't matter and like why should they even bother?
Yeah.
I'll also add one more note too. We used to have a activist support group. We still have the Facebook group and things, but we had a former board member, Lauren, who had a background in shoot a good Gestalt and had like therapy background and ran an activist support group. And we do like in addition to that kind of larger community, like we face a lot of very specific problems as animal rights or groups too. And we also want to build that out to be a larger thing and try to support activists in general, and humans in general. So, I mean, I think it is like you can be very intentional and conscious about that too, and create programs and systems that help support people. And I think we need to get back to that. We have been low on our available uh, person power, so we haven't been able to do that. But I do think we want to get back to it if at all possible, and it is important.
NARN was the first organization that started the vegan mentor program. We haven't
All right.
kept it up, but that was Pete Keller's idea.
Mhm.
Nice.
Kind of proud of
Go
that.
Pete.
Yeah, we should get that going again. Yeah, I
Mhm.
think
We don't have anybody to manage it.
I
Yes.
know.
That
I would say
man.
these things. If anybody's interested, please reach out.
Yes.
There are
Yes,
other
So,
definitely.
groups. There are other groups that do it now. We don't have to.
okay.
Mhm.
We can focus on other things.
Dare I say that avoiding despair, that being in a state of undespair, however you would phrase that, is a radical act. It is activism, refusing to wallow in despair, refusing to fall into despair, because
Mhm.
these systems of oppression rely on us to be immobile and to be in a state of despair um or be stagnant. It's a wholly radical thing to form community with each other, um, especially what we're talking about, intersectional communities, multi-species justice communities.
Mhm.
And I think just casting off the cloak of despair is one of the first things that somebody could do if they're looking to enter into an advocacy role or become an activist or even just make small changes. I think it's a thank you for indulging me on talking about
Mhm.
despair. I think it's very important. We have 4 minutes left. I invite you both to make some closing remarks. Unstructured, however you'd like to close. But Rachel, go ahead.
Okay, I'm gonna try and be brief because I tend to ramble. I think more than anything, I really like conversations like this. So I'm thanks Hannah for coming up with the idea. I think it's really I think it's kind of nice to get to know each other. Like I don't really like to be in the spotlight or anything. I get weird about that, obviously, just talking. Um, it's I think just like the philosophy. I mean, that's not the right word, but like how we think about things and it does go back to like how NARN operates and the strategy, and those are very interesting conversations to me. So I'm glad we could do this, and I really appreciate people showing up, and I'm glad that NARN has so many supporters. So just get all warm fuzzies. Thank you.
Mhm. Yeah, I wanted to thank everybody for being here as well. I really appreciate it. And I think one of the kind of overarching points I would make is that I think I also love these conversations. I think often they can feel very challenging. I mean, no one knows everyone else's issues and concerns and things that are going on. And I think um, like we don't understand all of the things that we want to help with, and we don't always use the right words. We don't always say the right things. You have to be willing to accept that you're going to do things wrong, that you're going to say the wrong thing, and give each other grace to figure it out. And so I think that's a very important aspect of having these conversations. And I would love, where I'm open to ever hearing any of those types of things. Like if it feels like we didn't take the right tact, or even in this conversation, if we said something that seems problematic or an issue. I've even heard the term problematic is problematic. So like, there's so many things that are complicated about these conversations, and I would love to hear any feedback from anyone on that. But I do really appreciate having those conversations and hope we can continue to do better and improve and find a path that really works toward collective liberation. So,
I'm paying attention to the chat, and there's
mhm.
there's a lot of interest in the vegan mentoring.
Yeah.
What are some groups who are doing it right now?
I think somebody posted in the chat that there was some um what was it? I'm sorry, I didn't miss it. Oh, animal collective something.
Animal
Yeah.
Activism
Animal
Collective.
Activism Collective, yeah.
No, I don't know that actually. AAC.
Yeah, I'm not aware of them, but I like.
But Serenity, you always know the most awesome things that are going on and always tell us about them. So we appreciate it.
Oh, thanks, Chloe. Yay.
Oh yeah,
I
that's awesome.
appreciate
Thank
your
you.
comment. It's been a challenging couple of weeks, so really that makes me feel
Mhm.
that you like that
Arts.
we could do something good.
Mhm.
Yes, feels good to be able to give back to the community. Definitely. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right.
But
Sorry,
I'd
go ahead.
also be fine to stay on for a few if anybody else wants to ask
yeah,
any other.
I'm okay. I'm okay with staying on a little bit too.
If you
If
need to go,
you
Hannah, you
folks
can
have more
assign me.
questions. I know usually like Hannah knows, I'm like, it's 7 o'clock, I'm done. But this
Well,
has been enjoyable, so I could stay on a little longer.
Well, now I'm intrigued and I must know what you all talk about. So if we don't stay for too late, then yes, I would like to stay.
That's
Um,
assuming anyone has other questions or
Yeah,
yeah,
things.
assuming
So
not like if people need to go, just yeah, obviously go.
go
But
for it. Mhm.
yeah, there's can we save this chat, Hannah? Because I think there's some good comments in here.
Mhm.
Mike, can we save the chat?
I think it's recorded automatically if you
Okay.
record the call in the cloud. You did
Okay.
that, you record in the cloud.
Um, I I think I said right to my desktop, which is usually where I
Oh,
put it.
yeah, I'm not sure it will then. I can try to, let me just see it again. I don't think we fixed it. We actually had this conversation on the last Zoom call and it's set to the wrong setting right now and it's not letting us copy or paste the,
I think whoever's the host should be able to save it off before they quit.
uh,
And I actually think even if you don't do it, it saves it, it sends it to the host. It's been
maybe.
Okay,
my experience before in hosting meetings.
Hmm.
we'll
I'll
have to
look
make.
and see if it's on the info, if we've gotten any of those to the info email. That's who's set up as the email. So, um, but anyone, yeah, does anybody have any other specific questions or topics? I'll look at that while we're doing it.
I was, if I,
Mhm.
sorry,
Go for it. Mhm.
I was just going to say the whole thing around language, I think it's really important. I think at the same time, we need to have gentleness and forgiveness because not everyone is on the bleeding edge of the latest in terminology and sometimes may use some terminology unintentionally that might offend someone. So it's really important to be gentle and forgiving with people.
Yeah, I agree, and also just be cognizant that like no one person can speak for any particular group. I have
There's no universal truth in there. I mean, different
yeah,
groups have differences in how you.
there's my day job, was has a sputtering DEI stuff. I mean, it was sputtering before Trump came. Anyway, one of the people that's in our group, he happens to be from, I think, Chile or Argentina. I can't remember which one. But he did a talk about his culture, and he was like, "Don't ever say Latinx." Like he was adamant, like, "Don't ever say that." And I, I didn't want to be like correct him because that's not my place. But I also thought, like, there are people that do like that term, so he can't. I thought I didn't. He can't speak for every single person, although he did try. But it's just, there's an example, like he doesn't like it, but there are other people that do like that term. So he doesn't like no one person gets to decide. So it's good to um yeah, just listen, I think is good. I appreciate your point, Paul, is have some grace, but also just listen, like, why does someone object to a term and then kind of think about it and try to do better.
Yeah, and if you're in the an appropriate position to do so, perhaps gently educate the person as well as to why, that terminology doesn't work. So it's important that we gently inform each other as well. So it's both important. Chloe, yes, go ahead.
Um, yeah, so thanks again. I've loved listening in to every second of this. I did have a question about, um, I guess, do you have any feedback or is there anything that you could point to as like helpful tips for making relationships with other organizations to like these same ends? This is all like a new space to me, but it speaks to my heart, and I'm trying to understand how best to approach these conversations and get other organizations on board.
Um, so I guess it depends for me, it depends on the organization. But I think NARN has had, and I feel we've had more success by, if there's a particular organization that is of interest to you, to go in there, like thinking about what you can learn and what you can do. I mean, we've made a great relationship with Hip Hop is Green simply by helping them with fiscal sponsorship. And like we're just there um I mean, not, I mean, to help, but also just to learn and do what we can. And I mean, I guess it technically was a transactional relationship because we were there, we were literally
Yeah,
helping them
but
do transactions.
yeah.
But
Although with no actual like no royalties and those things. So we were literally just trying to help on those on
but
the
for me, it was like a really good opportunity to learn. Um, oh, thank you, Fernando. Appreciate that. Oh,
Mhm.
uh, it was I learned a lot just by helping out with Keith, and who's a delightful person, and all the rest of the people with Hip Hop is Green. Like their focus is on health aspect, and it really, like, I've always kind of shied away from focusing on the health aspect of veganism because that's not that's more of like a selfish thing. But in certain to me, in certain communities, especially the Black community, it is like more of a radical liberation is to like eat healthier foods rather than foods that maybe you grew up with because you couldn't afford any better. And so self-care and the way that he approached it is like totally makes sense from that aspect. But it wasn't, and I sort of got it, but not until that I was more involved with that community was I really understood the true power of the way that he approached it. Um, and um, I found that was I learned a lot and it helped me do better activism. And I still don't think that maybe NARN is the right organization to focus on the health aspect, but it doesn't mean we can't partner with organizations that are better equipped for that conversation. Because I still feel like, especially as coming from the white community, it can feel like finger wagging if we're like, eat your vegetables. Yeah. Anyway, that's just my opinion. But
Yeah, thank
I
you
don't
for
know if
that.
that answered your question.
Yeah, no, listening, that's something that I can kind of take to it because I'm learning a lot in general about advocacy. And so even in partnering with other organizations, it's a learning process. And I think that helps lower some defenses. So I appreciate that.
And
I
I
think
found I got involved with a community group right after Trump got elected the first time, and it was like one of those um, solely focused on politics. And I feel like even though I was trying not to interject my veganism in there, I was just like, I'm here to help my community. It's like my district. The fact that I was there, and I think the fact that you're there, like if you decide to join with another group, just you being there, it actually matters because they're like, oh, there's a vegan. I mean, I'm assuming you are. I don't know, but but they're like, hey, there's this animal rights activist, vegan, whatever, however I see yourself as just you being there, they notice that. You don't even have to sometimes like be vocal, but they I think that makes a difference. Even if it feels small, it like reverberates.
I think if you go into if you go into the orgs with an authentic desire to be there as part of that community and support and do things and you do that work. Like it is tricky because, limited time is always a challenge, but if you're there and authentically showing up and doing things, it'll happen. You build the connection with the people, you build the relationship, you talk about what your concerns are and what you're interested in. And like for instance, I didn't push on veganism in any of my previous orgs, but it came up and it became a conversation at different times, and it was always supported, but it wasn't centered. And so I think you can be there and yeah, at least give some amount of connection over time. But again, it's not the transactional thing. You're showing up to be there in support of that group, and I think that's where the listening particularly comes in of paying attention and understanding really what they're doing.
Thank you so much.
Mhm. Okay, I tried a cloud recording. I don't know if it's going to get the chat, but we'll see. I don't see another way to change it once it's in process. So
Thank you, Maura. All right. Any other thoughts or comments before we wrap up? All right. Okay, it sounds like we can conclude our first educational speaker series of 2025. which is very exciting. We are planning on hosting 3 or 4 more educational speaker series this year, so keep an eye out for them. The next one will be in April, and it will feature somebody from somebody who was in the animal testing industrial complex system, but who, what's her full name, Rachel, actually?
I think it's Madeline Cross now, but she founded When We Justify. And so I thought we were going to try and schedule one in between then, but that's the next one we have firmly on the calendar is she's going to talk about her experiences working in a lab. So When We Justify is like kind of a combination of support for people that worked or still work, for that matter, in animal testing in facilities that test on animals, because it is traumatic for the non-human animals as well. And also just like talk about, obviously the science doesn't back up what we do to non-human animals. So anyway, I did, I mean, once I heard about When We Justify, I was like, wow, this is amazing. To me, like one of the particular animal issues I'm passionate about is animal testing for a variety of reasons. So I was really thrilled to learn about When We Justify, and then I heard her give a talk, and so I was like, oh my God, please come give a talk to our organization. So yeah, I think her group is super important. I'm really grateful that it exists, and I'm glad that she is going to come talk to us.
Yes. Yeah, so keep a lookout for that. Thank you, Krasno. I could not remember her last name, and I didn't want to say anything wrong. So, um, if there is an educational speaker series before that, you will know, I promise. We do have some in the works. So, that's exciting. Also, we are launching a program night, and our first program night that NARN will ever hold is this month as well. So I invite you all to that as we grow program night and see how that goes. So just go ahead and look at our events calendar or our social media or our newsletter for all of these events that are coming up. We've got some fun things in store. So with that, let me just check.
One more note. I was just going to say, I'll also try to get this recording up on YouTube. We have a channel, and we have actually Fernando, we have one of his previous talks on there. So we have some past educational series stuff, and I'll try to get those up, and we can maybe mention that in the next newsletter or put a link to them on the website somewhere. So I'll work on doing that.
Good idea. Thanks, Mike.
Hmm.
All right,
Thank you.
everybody. Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Have a nice night. Until next time. Appreciate you all being here and spending time with us.
Thank you,
Thanks.
everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you all. Stay on for a minute and see if I can sort out this chat thing, but
Should I continue recording?
you could just make me the host.
Okay. Should I stop recording though? Do you think that has anything?
Oh yeah, you can stop recording. Yeah. I will too, actually. I'm gonna